Hello and welcome back to the workbench. I have scissors ready, but I have the MN99s on the bench, and it's missing the motor and transmission. But don't fear, because I have another one right here. And I'm going to show you how to assemble one of these. I bought the one that's unassembled because that's what I do. I don't know if they're all that way or not, but here it is. So let's take it all apart and see what kind of parts we have in here. Then I'm going to figure out how to assemble it, and then I'm going to disassemble it and turn the camera back on. So we've got our case. What else do we have? We have more stuff. We have another bag. Why are there bags inside of bags? Why? Look. We have a motor. I don't know if this motor is any good or not, but I have this motor to put in it. So let's see how that goes. It's a 3,000 kVs. Probably too much power, but we'll see. All right, what do we have for gears? Here's all the gears. They're in fairly good shape. I'll have to check them all out. This one looks a little dirty, but that's okay. We'll clean them up with the wire brush. And we have a servo. And all of the little thingamabobbers. That looks like the servo thing. This is about as generic servo as you can get. There's no name on it. My guess is this is a little 9-gram servo, like this one. And let's see, same size. So I could replace this servo with this one if I wanted to later on, but we'll figure it out. Okay, so let's let me figure out how to assemble this, put it all together. I'll take it all apart. I'll put it back in order, sort of like it is right now. And I'll show you how to assemble this 2-speed transmission. Alright, welcome back. Let's get this thing assembled. Here are some things I found. 1, it did not include the screws to put this part together. So the 4 screws that go here. It also did not include the screws to put this part onto here. Luckily, they are the same size. They are M2 by 8. And also did not include the grub screw that goes into this. So you'll need a little grub screw as well. I believe it's the same size as the one that come with the drive shaft. But nice if it came with the grub screw, because that's the hardest one to find. So, what size is that grub screw? That looks like an M2.5, but let's make sure. Yes, that's an M2.5. So you can either use a grub screw or you can use a button head screw to make that work. As with all my other videos, I recommend that you go out and get one of these button head screw kits. You get them in the M2, M2.5, and M3. Get one of these kits. It's going to save your bacon quite a few times. All right. The only screws that came with the kit don't work well. These two guys. Those are M3, and they are countersunk screws. The mesh between this pinion and this spur is way too tight. So you need to get this motor moved this way about 1 millimeter. To do that, you use your friend the rat tail file, and you file these holes so they're oblong going that way and that way. And this hole, the motor goes through that way. Then you have to get your Dremel or Proxon and grind away on this side a little bit, about 1 millimeter off, in order to get that motor to move that way. Then you put in just this screw on this side so that it's not tight but not loose, so you can still move the motor a little bit. And then you put your gear in, make sure you have a good mesh. Once you have a good mesh, tighten the screw all the way. Make sure you have a good mesh. Pull that out. Put the other screw in. Tighten it up. Put this back in. Make sure you have a good mesh. I had to do that like 15 times in order to get it to work. Between screwing it, getting the rat tail file, getting the, I only had to use the Dremel once to get that to work. Once you get it, you got it, and don't worry about it anymore. You can then, once it's in the spot you want, then you take one screw out, Loctite it, put it back in, take the other screw out, because they're both tight now, right? So you take the other one out, Loctite it, and put it back in, and then it's in the same spot. You don't have to worry. And now that isn't going to go anywhere. I am not going to lube these gears up yet. I will lube them up later. I want to get this in the truck and make sure it's all working perfectly, make sure the shifting is working perfectly, everything is fine, before I then take this all apart and lube it up. Why? Because I don't know if I have to take this apart a few times to get it to work, and I don't want to be messing with gears that are all greasy. The other challenge that I ran into is that these axles here, or these shafts, are mushroomed on the end. So these bearings won't come back out because I forced them on with a 3mm wrench by pounding them in. Don't do that. I broke a bearing. So what I had to do with this one is I had to get my friend the regular file here and file that down a little bit, rotating this as I file it. You can put it inside of the screwdriver or what have you to get it to spin, and file it down to get that mushroom off the end, and then the bearing fits in there just peachy. This bearing right here is the one I broke, and that one's pressed in there pretty good. It's a little bit bigger than the ones that came with it, I guess, so it doesn't want to come out. So I'm not worried about it because it's working. So you won't have to worry about that because you're listening to me, and you're going to remove the mushrooming from the end. Okay, let's get this thing put together. Now, you have to make sure you get the fork, the shifting fork, in the right spot. As you look at this thing, we've got two gears. We have our this part here in the middle, this nut. This nut goes around this piece, and that's what moves it back and forth. Way it's put together, and if this is wrong, I will re-record this, and you won't even know this. But I have the long part of this shaft towards the smaller end. It's a 50-50 chance. We'll see if I'm right. Okay, good. So you want, when it's all together, so that these both are the same from end to end. Okay? So the distance from here to there is the same as the distance from there to there. In my case, it was 11 millimeters. This is the part you're going to put in first. You want to make sure that you get the fork in the right spot. The fork goes in here, like so. It will fit in either end. It's going to go like that. So I am going to put it in like this. Why am I putting it in on this side and not on this side? This is the side they say to put it with the pictures. This is how they show you. I'm doing it on this side because it's easier for you to see what's going on. So I've got this, and I'm going to put the big side of the gear towards the motor side. So the big gear towards the motor. Oops. And you got to get the fork in there. So let's get the fork in there. Voila. So I have the fork in there. I have that gear. The fork is going to go back and forth, and that's how it shifts. And now we need the idler gear. The idler gear is this one. It's going to go the small side towards the big side. Like that. So that fits in there like that. Then we're going to get the one that goes against the motor. Now the motor, these two gears that are left look exactly the same, but they're not. This one has a coarser gear pattern than this one. The one with the finer gear pattern goes against the motor. Like so. The one with the coarser gear pattern goes like this. Because it goes in, connect the small goes to the big, and then this small goes to this big idler right there. So that's how that is assembled. Then you grab this and you hope like hell it all fits. And it did. I shook it a little bit as I put it together. The first time I did this, it didn't go that easy. This time it did. Go figure. So that's that. I have to make sure that this long shaft is towards these two little guys right here, because this is where the shifting mechanism is. If it's the other way, where this long side is against the motor, there's nowhere to mount the servo. There's a place to mount the servo right there. So now let's get a couple screws in there and let's test this motor. I happen to have a bench power supply, so I can test it on the bench without connecting it to the electronic speed control and all that other stuff, because I have all the stuff. I'm cool. So that's how I'm going to configure it. That's how I'm going to test it. You could hook this up to your electronic speed control and test it that way. It will work the same way. And it will test the same way. All right, I'm just going to put 2 in because that way it'll work perfectly. If I put 4 in, it won't work perfectly. Why? Because that's the law of this kind of stuff. The more you assemble it, the less, on the first try, the less chance you have of it working right. So I've got that connected to my bench power supply. I've got it set to 2 volts. I'll hit the output. It'll start to spin. I'll pull that. Yeah. I push that. Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. That's great. Now it's going fast. Now it's going slow. All right. So it's together, it's happy, it's working. So now what I'm going to work on is the servo. Because the instructions don't exist and somebody has a blog post with just photographs and they have a few words on it, I'm going to go ahead and go through it for you. That way you don't have to go through it yourself. You can watch me do it. Boy, that does not want to come off of there. All right, I'll be back in a second. Well, I got it all together, finally. It took a little bit of coaxing to get it in there. Let me point out the parts that I needed to do different or whatever, the challenging parts. You saw in a previous episode where we replaced the trailing arms, or the suspension arms, with aluminum ones. Well, I had to go back to the plastic ones in order for this to work, because the aluminum ones, as you can see, are a little bit thicker, and because they're thicker, they interfered with the shifting mechanism here. So I had to go back to normal. So what I did is I drilled out each of these arms 2.5 millimeters except for one of them, and then I could put a screw all the way through, and then this made these arms much, much, much better than stock. They don't move around quite as much, move around as far as jiggling back and forth or twisting or what have you. They're nice and sturdy, and they still have suspension-y to them, so that is good. This arm here, the one that's closest to the shifter, that one has a shorter screw, but I used a 2.5 mil screw in order to screw that into there. But I couldn't put the nut all the way through because it interfered with the transmission. That's with the transmission up all the way as far as it can go. To get the transmission to work, it took some doing. At first I thought, because the way this piece is, I don't know if you can quite make that out, but there is an indent in the back of that piece where they routed through there. I thought that would go against the servo horn. Servo horn here. Kind of hard to see. I thought that would go against the servo horn. So the servo horn rode inside of that groove. It does not. That groove goes away from the servo horn. So what I did is I got the servo. I'm using my little switch here. So I've got the center of the servo so that it's at the 90-degree spot. And then I set the EXP, or the end of it, so when I push it back, I set that EXP like down to 10% to get started. And then I slowly moved that EXP forward until I got it to a spot I wanted. Right now I think it's at like 80%. So this only moves to the 90 degree mark, and then it moves forward 80% of its travel. And then that makes the shift. I did replace this spring with a different one. You can use the one that comes with it by all means. You just need to shorten it. It's a little long. I had the, as I edit this, I'll add the distance right down here to the bottom of how long this spring is compared to the other one. Everything else seems to work. The drive shafts seem to be okay. There is enough meat left in them, even though they look like they're really far away. There is enough meat left in them, so they're good there. Yeah, everything is good. I think I am happy with this MN99s for now. The only other thing I could do is try to throw a brushless in here and see what it does, but I'm going to see what this one does first. I did try a cheaper electronic speed control, one of those little ones that are shrink wrapped. Yeah, I fried it. I don't know if it was something I did wrong or whatever, but I did let the smoke out of it. So get yourself a good speed control for this motor. This motor does run pretty hot. So you can see I've got the speed control sitting up here. I've got all the wires run along the side here. And then I've got the radio back here in the back. And that just seemed to be how it worked the best, because the speed control was rather large. I do have these pieces here available. I'll put them up on my printables page. You can print out your own of these and have an adjustable shock mount for your 59mm or 60mm shocks. So yeah, I'm happy with it so far. The upgrade here was, I don't know if it's worth it or not compared to the other metal one. It's much better than the other metal one. It's as far as comparing it to the stock one, I don't know if it's any better or not. I've just gotten so far into upgrades on these things I can't tell anymore. But this one seems to do well. It does not have all the parts you need. You need to make sure you get that 2.5 mil screw kit I talked about and that 2 mil screw kit that I talked about, so that you can have some screws to screw this thing up. Well, it's high centering, but it's done that before. It's got plenty of power, plenty of torque. I adjusted the throttle curve, so let me show you what I did. I went into mode, and I went to the XP, and I went to forward curve. I changed the curve so it looks like that. Look at the difference. What a difference that made. Getting that shock fixed will help a lot too. But it's not jumpy anymore. That is wonderful. Nice. All right. I am happy with the results of this Defy Nerd. Yeah, Defy Nerd. I am very happy with this Defy Nerd. Yeah. Thanks for watching this long video. If you made it to the end and to this part, you're a trooper.